Hello, this is Acey Slade with the band Dope, and you're watching That Just Happened.
Hey guys, what's going on? It is Front Row Joe. We're hanging out at Stache, and look who we bumped into. We got Acey Slade right over here. Acey, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're here at Revolution Live for the Regeneration Tour. Dope is supporting, co-headlining, supporting. And certainly it is a 20th anniversary celebration of Wisconsin Death Trip, but you guys are also celebrating 20 years of your first record as well. So it's pretty cool that those two things are going on at the same time. What's your impression of this tour so far, again, with memorial for Wayne Static and bringing those tunes back around again?
Well, I'll say the thing that I found most interesting was that from the very beginning, I remember having Wisconsin Death Trip, and before we even toured with Static, or maybe it was like, well, this is one of the bands we're going to be touring with, and picking up the album and falling in love instantly. And so I loved the band from day one. And what I didn't expect to have happen when I saw them for the first show is how fresh it felt. Like, it didn't feel like, I've seen other bands that came out in that time period, and it does feel like nostalgia, but the Static show does not feel like nostalgia at all. Like, I feel like if I walked into a room and saw that band, I would be just as blown away.
Yeah, it is timeless for sure. And again, you've been around for a while, and Dope certainly has been intertwined with Static. You knew Wayne. What can you tell from your personal friendship with him? What can you explain about that for us and share with us? I think
it's a little difficult for me to speak for the band. I obviously can't, but I think what is really cool about the Static show right now is it seems like, there was a point where the band Static X, whoever was in it, whatever people it was, it had kind of run its course, even though it was still touring and even though it was still going. And I feel like this version of Static takes off where the band was at its peak, if that makes any sense. Yeah, and so I think Wayne would be pretty happy about it, and it does really leave you with a feeling of it being a celebration, and it's like that old saying of like, remember the guy that was, not the guy that, became, because when Wayne was at the end, it wasn't exactly the prettiest picture, but when that guy was on point, there's nobody better, so yeah.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you sharing that with us. But again, I mentioned at the top that, you've got the majority of, or you've got most of the songs from that record on this set list. Can you tell me a little bit about the recording of that and just your recollection, first album, just after getting signed, and up in New York at what was it, Green Street Studios? Yeah. So can you kind of walk us through your memory of how that was and being in the studio for the first time with Dope?
It was awesome. I think that the one thing that, like, looking back on it, that you always look back at the things you'd change, but because there's a lot that we would change if we were doing it again, but you can't go back in a time machine, unfortunately. Nobody's got a flux capacitor on this tour. So I would say just being in a studio in New York, and for myself, this is my experience, but just living in New York for the first time, moving to New York. I'll never forget, we did half of it at Green Street Studios, and then the other half we did at Quad Studios, which is where Mariah Carey was like just in that studio before us. And one of the things that's kind of funny about that is it's like, why were you spending Mariah Carey money on a band whose lead off track was going to be Everything Sucks? Like, that was really dumb, But there we were. I think it was $4,000 a day or whatever it was. And I literally, it was like that scene in the Bad News Bears, like when the kid's at the Astrodome and he's like spinning around and he falls on his ass. Like that was me coming up out of Times Square. And I was in Times Square looking at all the lights and shit, and then going up into the studio. And yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, very cool. Well, speaking of Everything Sucks, that was the first single, one of the singles.
It was one of we've released a couple with a soft release, but Everything Sucks was the music video. So
right. Talking about that music video, Mark Klasfeld, who has gone on to direct some episodes of Oz, and he's very prolific, commercials for Nike and Target and all of that. But at the time, and still prolific at the time, but he worked mainly with hip hop artists and rappers. Was there any trepidation whenever, and was it the studio that picked it for you guys? How did that come about where he was the guy for that video?
I can't say for sure, but I guess maybe the analogy that I'll use is, do you remember the Monster Magnet video for, I guess it was for Space Lord, that came out around that time, where it was kind of like, it was sort of a spoof on the hip hop videos. Ours was not a spoof on the hip hop videos, but taking that and bringing it into our own world. Like, in other words, in a hip hop video, they might be in a jacuzzi, smoking blunts, throwing money, diamonds, and all that stuff. Whereas in ours, it was like, we've got a twisted Uncle Sam, fire going everywhere, strippers that are painted in metal, and like fire, and BMX racers, and yeah, Bridget the Midget.
Yeah. And if it wasn't, it sure looked like it, but it looked like the steel cage of death in the circus where, they ride the motorcycles. There was a lot going on in that video, as you just described. Was it a little intimidating? Was it just sensory overload, or were you guys having a blast?
We were having a blast and sensory overload, because the other thing too is, like, they built that set for us. They built that Thunderdome ball, and they built that just for the video, and then the whole huge backdrops, and like, you kind of got there, it's like, oh, the shit just got real, man.
Yeah, Mariah Carey money again.
Exactly.
I like it. So again, going back to that time, you've been one of the longest standing members, although they've had a rotation, but you've been one of the longest standing members with Dope. Is it, give your impression now, especially the musical landscape of back 20 years and where you are now, just your impressions of maybe survivability, relevance still. You mentioned Static. If you turned it on today and people would still jam to it, I think the same could be said for Dope. And also too, let's lump this in there, the new metal or industrial is still relevant. Disco's come and gone, grunge has come and gone, but why that genre has endured.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like one of the things that our generation of musicians were very lucky about is we never had a Nirvana, if you know what I mean. So like, when I was in high school, I listened to a lot of punk rock and I listened to some hair metal, and when Nirvana came along, everything changed. Like, it was like something that was cool a week ago all of a sudden was absolutely dated, and like, you didn't even want to admit to owning or thinking about or anything like that. But we never had that, fortunately. Like, we never had this thing that just came along and knocked all the chess pieces off the board. So we're lucky in that aspect. I often wonder if the sustainability of hip hop, like hip hop, you gotta remember back then everyone was saying, oh, hip hop and rap, that's a trend, it's gonna, nobody's gonna be listening to that in 20 years, and yet they still are. So maybe that crossover is still acceptable because that other genre is still thriving.
Well, we know, again, reminiscing about the past and the first record. Now let's talk about the next record real quick, if we can. Blood Money Part 1 came out 2016. It's been supposedly coming out. I know there's a lot that goes into releasing, and certainly self-produced. I know Edsel is producing it, right? So I know there's a lot going on with that. But we did get a teaser, Ministry's cover, Thieves and Liars. Do we know when Part 2 is expected?
Well, basically the main problem is just songs, and Edsel only has 50 songs to choose from. So as you can tell, he's been creatively dry. No, I'm kidding. Actually, it's been the total opposite. I think that it's like when you have that much content, focusing it down to 12 is a hard task. But a lot of it too is that, writing it in a way where there's continuity with part one, because Etzel was in a certain headspace when he wrote part one. He's not in that headspace now, so it's like, well, do you make it about the other side of that? Do you continue that? So it's going to happen, and it'll happen soon. And the thing you have to remember too, and you hit the nail on the head, Dope has always been very self-contained and very DIY, and along with that, it's not like we're DIY, but we're like the Descendants, who I love, but it's like their logo is Milo, the little stick figure type guy, and that's what they put on a t-shirt. And if they do a music video, it's very static and very maybe one camera thing, black and white. Dope is DIY, but the content is so much more labor intensive. So it's not just so the songs are done, but now it's like, all right, well, what's the packaging going to look like? Because Dope's packaging is always awesome. What's the music video going to look like? Because we're going to do 4 music videos that are all going to look sick. So that's kind of it there, and we do it all. Etzel does it all, I should say. And Etzel does all of that. So it's not one of those things where he would be happy saying, hey, here's 12 new songs and there's Blood Money Part 2. Yeah. So that's why it takes some time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like you said, 50 songs like drinking from a fire hose. You got to pare that down.
That's a very good analogy. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I drink from a lot of fire hoses.
So, like I mentioned earlier, we like to close the show with a That Just Happened moment. You've had a long storied career. You've worked with icons in the industry as well. Is there a That Just Happened moment that pops out to you can share with us?
Probably the one that, any of the legacy artists that I've worked with, like I was part of some big reunion shows not long ago, and just standing there and like watching my record collection be played on stage, and I'm like, oh, and I got a guitar? Oh, I'm doing this too? Like, that was pretty crazy. But probably when I played Tasmania with Joan Jett, and the whole thing was, that just happened like a couple days. So we were supposed to leave for Tasmania Christmas Day, I think, and get into Tasmania a couple days early. And I'm stoked. Like, part of my thing with touring is I love the glory of it. I love being on the road. When I die, I want it to be like a car that, comes sliding in sideways up to St. Peter, and I'm going, what the hell did you do with this car? Like, that's what I want my body to be like, my life, And going to Tasmania is like one of those things, Who would have thought I'd ever go to Tasmania? So anyway, we were supposed to leave on Christmas Day. I get to the airport, and like one little snowflake snows. Well, if you know anything about Australia and that part of the world, it's summertime there. So my thought was like, oh, cool, like I get to see one snowflake, and then I'm going to land and it's going to be palm trees. Well, as soon as I get into the airport, they've canceled all the flights. I'm like, but it's just one flake. I don't know why it didn't matter. They canceled all our flights. So we had to leave later. So we ended up flying right into Tasmania on New Year's Eve, and we got there, like dropped our bags, took a shower, went straight to the stage. So it was very hectic. We get there, and this show in Tasmania, it was like a scene in the Doors movie. Like, there's naked dudes like on people's shoulders, and blown up inflatable love dolls being thrown around. It was like, holy crap, right? So with that, they're about to start we're about to launch into the song. There's a stage clock. We're going to launch into the next song. We're going to end that, and then it's going to be the countdown for New Year's. So we're halfway through the song, power goes out on the stage, but like the power everywhere else is on. So on stage, power goes out. So we stop, and we're all kind of like looking at each other, like, all right, what do we do? Well, Joan starts talking to our keyboard player, who's our manager, and they start fighting about something. I don't know what they were fighting, but they start arguing. And I'm looking at the big digital backdrop. 10, 9, 8, like, go over to Joan. I'm like, Joan. And she's like, right? Hey, we missed New Year's. We missed the countdown. Like, at 1, like, everybody kind of turns around. I'm like, I tried to tell you, And then all of a sudden, the manager's like, okay, everybody, we're going to do the countdown again. And everyone's like, So that's definitely one of them, That was definitely one of them. Or there's a lot with Joan. Or we played the AMC season release party. And so we're playing the show, and it's like the cast of Walking Dead, the cast of Better Call Saul. I don't remember who else came. Maybe Mad Men. It was like all the actors from the show, like watching me play, and I'm like, oh my God! I'm like, there's the Dixon, shit, like all the actors. I forget. I'm so bad with names, but it's like it's the entire cast of Walking Dead sitting there, like. And then it's like, the Better Call Saul cast. And I'm like, why are they watching me play right now? I should be watching them on TV, So yeah.
That's really cool. Those are great. That's what that's all about. So certainly, again, appreciate your time. Can't wait for the show. Guys, check out Dope, Acey Slade, and That Just Happened.